Afternoon, Terry Warner here. Can you hear me okay?
We can hear you okay, Terry.
Great, thank you.
Apparently with UDOT.
I'm
And Terry,
sorry?
just so you know, I'm gonna kind of switch you over to just be viewing until it's your turn to participate in the meeting.
Terry Warner here. Can you hear me okay? That sounds fine. I appreciate that. I just wanted to run a test since I had to download Zoom for some odd reason.
Okay, yes, so you're here.
All right, thanks for running that test. I will stop my video and mute.
Okay.
Talk to y'all soon.
Usual. You what?
Good afternoon.
Hi, Jen.
Well, hello on the Ionian Sea.
Greetings. Greetings. I'm trying to pick a better background that's going to be less demanding.
Don't worry about it.
Bandwidth demanding.
Yeah, don't.
Looks all right, I guess.
Yeah.
Yeah, how you doing, Roger?
Doing pretty well, thank you. Have you gone through the Straits of Messina yet?
Yes, we just did, actually, right at sunset. Super beautiful.
I'll bet.
What's your connection to the Straits of Messina?
Let's see, it's where Patton and Alexander met in the great movie Patton.
Yeah. Yeah.
You know, it's World War II connection. It's not World War II history. Incidentally, I was not in the army during World War II, for those who might be interested.
Thanks for clarifying that.
Yeah, you're welcome.
It's a really interesting place. It's a really interesting place, actually, because it's like a nature preserve for about the 60 miles of the strait itself. Just all kinds of sea life, sea turtles, dolphins, swordfish. It's really it's like a marine preserve.
Sanctuary. Oh, really?
Sanctuary.
Huh.
Yeah, it's really super beautiful. It's the only place in the Med that you can fish for swordfish still. And they have to be caught by hand. And that means like with a treble hook, chucking the thing, you can't even shoot it. You have to chuck it by hand. But the swordfish are so valuable. Yeah, they pull up a 600 or 700 pound swordfish and it's worth a ton of money. So, and only native people to the area are allowed to do it. And I'm like, who knows how to fish with a treble hook anyway?
Right. Wow.
I see them out there. I've never seen them actually get one. I've passed through there a number of times, but they're out on calm evenings when the water's really still and they can see the fish. And one guy's on the front of the boat laying down, and he's got the treble hook. It's like the Poseidon thing.
Wow.
So that it's got like, I saw one the other day, it was like 5 prongs.
Uh-huh.
Try to spear the fish. Oh,
Sounds like something that dates back several centuries.
indigenous people. Did you see that thing today about the whales in New Zealand?
No.
400 pilot whales beached themselves in New Zealand and died.
Whoa.
No one has any explanation. And just, I always think man has to be responsible in some way, right? Like nature wouldn't do that.
I wouldn't think so.
Environmental travesty.
Indeed. Let's see. We've got 1, 2, 3, 4 council persons here. And it's and some other folks. We'll give it a couple of minutes here before we open the meeting officially.
Had any snow in Alpha yet?
No, but man, the trees are just stunning. They're just I don't know how to describe it. Just, they're essentially all of the aspens now are in these golden colors, and it's just outstanding. And there's
I saw the skier posted a spectacular picture yesterday of the aspens on the base of Superior.
Yeah,
It's beautiful.
Every place, every direction you look. Well, there goes my cuckoo clock telling me it's 4 o'clock. So it must be 4 o'clock. Okay, welcome to the October 12th meeting of the Alpha Town Council, which is being held without a anchor location pursuant to my letter of September 29th. And that's for the health and safety of all participants. And I might add that there's been some interest in returning to a situation where there is a anchor location where we would meet together in person, as has been the case for many years. But I am not inclined to accelerate that, because while cases of COVID-19 are down, the future does not look that rosy to me. There's an article in Science, which is the premier journal of the International Journal of Science, really, American Association of Science. The headline is New Omicron strains may portend big COVID-19 waves. Emerging subvariant variants are more immune evasive than ever. And my sense is that it's a lot easier to relax these cautions than it is to accelerate them. And so I'm of a mind to keep it the way it is until we're really much in a safer position. And Carolyn, you want to say anything about the health aspects of this?
Not necessarily, Roger. I think that was actually a pretty good summary, sir. I think that we just had a meeting today and still talking about how, COVID is in the background and people are still dying from COVID. And yes, we should all get vaccinated and boosted. And I think if any one of us feels uncomfortable meeting in person for whatever reason, that we should honor that desire.
Okay, let's now turn to citizen input. Does anyone like to come forth? Or is anybody on the agenda, Molly? Or
Nobody reached out to me ahead of time, but if there is anyone that is here that would like to speak, feel free to raise your hand in Zoom and I can enable your video and microphone.
And Mayor, if I may, while we wait for that, I just wanted to apologize to Harris Sondak. I had missed announcing that he had made a comment at the last meeting, but it was included. I made a little note on the minutes for the last meeting and it was included there and has been sent to the council. For this meeting, we've received 2 comments, one from Karen Travis and the other one from Mike Katz, and those have been sent to the council and will be part of the meeting minutes.
okay, and both pertain to the noise ordinance.
No, Karen Travis's was more about transportation.
Oh, was it? Okay. Okay. Well, with that, I think we'll just move right on to Laura, whom I see is with us, and I'd just like to introduce Laura and say, I think she's just part of our community. She used to work here in the position that Molly has now, and she may not be officially an Alta resident, but I'll bet emotionally she is.
That's true, Roger. And it does feel a little bit like coming home, because looking at the panel here, I have great memories with quite a few of you guys. And Carolyn, great to see you. John and Polly and Elise and John Byrne and Ben, Sheridan, everybody. So anyway, it's really great to be here. And Roger, Mayor, I don't know if you wanted me to just kind of start off on a litany of things based on some of the feedback you sent to me about what the council and town would like to talk about. I've sort of divided those things into some groupings we could talk about, or whatever format you would like.
Launch into it. It's your, but,
All right.
and I suspect there'll be some questions as we go along.
Okay, and before I launch into it, just by way of introduction, I am the director for Salt Lake City Public Utilities. I've been in this role for 6 years and have been with the department here for 14. And as was alluded to before, I did work at the town of Alta as the assistant town administrator for about 6 years, from 2002 to 2008. So I feel like I've had quite a long career in and around the Little Cottonwood watershed from different perspectives. My department is a city department, and so my bosses are the city mayor and city council, and it's a pretty large department. We have about close to 500 employees now. We operate a pretty significant water system. It's covers about 141 square miles and serves about 365,000 people. We also operate a sewer system and a stormwater system, and we were also given the street lighting function for the city too. So it's been an interesting job, and a lot of the things that Roger sent me via email that we could talk about are just right up front center for us. And so, those categories in my mind include, sort of what you might want to know about water supply and demand and water conservation, Great Salt Lake, watershed, category that I kind of call emerging issues such as the UDOT, Little Cottonwood EIS, perhaps new regulations that we as a public water system are going to be bound by in the future. That probably won't affect you guys, but just thought I would let you know. And then infrastructure has also been a big deal. So if that sounds okay, I will start with water supply and demand and conservation. So, I think you all are aware our region is currently situated in a mega drought. So we've had some pretty severe drought conditions over the last couple of decades, and the last 2 or 3 years, we've definitely seen an intensification of that. And that's not only affected the Salt Lake region, but the whole state of Utah, as well as, the whole Western United States. So we're not alone in dealing with this. And there are some pretty significant impacts across the Western region. One of the things that we as Salt Lake City, and I think you as Town of Alta by contract with us, have going for us that's positive is a very strong history of water supply and demand planning and water management and water conservation planning. So water supply and demand planning, that's an exercise that we take every few years. It's an iterative plan. We look out to at least the next 40 years. And it's a very technical and scientific based process where we take all of the data that's available to us on things like growth projections, climate projections, and water resource projections, land use changes, all of these different factors that impact demand of water and the supply of water. We kind of put all together, and we create a plan that kind of guides us on things like, are we going to need to increase our rate of conservation? So that's demand management. Or do we need to tap additional water supplies for the future? Or do we need to look at growth and land use more carefully to make sure that all these things are in alignment? So the last water supply and demand plan that we completed, we just finalized actually. And with that plan, with all of those factors into consideration, and then taking a very conservative approach. So the scenarios we use are historic dry water years, And then we add another factor of climate change uncertainty onto it. We will need to conserve more by the year 2060 in order to comfortably meet water supply and demand. And so that recently completed plan was then used to inform our recently adopted update to our water conservation plan, which then gives all of these implementation strategies in terms of how can we conserve more so that we have the water we need by 2060. And I'll say that my next iteration of this process is going to include water for Great Salt Lake too. So I think that we are in a pretty good space in terms of our planning processes, the types of water resources we have. But there are a lot of stressors and a lot of challenges. And I think it's really admirable and important that Mayor Burke and this town council are thinking a lot about water and your role in the watershed and your role in water demand and that type of thing. So I'm happy to share any of those documents with you and take any feedback that you have for me about that, or any questions right now as well. Hopefully that wasn't too theoretical of a introduction, but I boiled down a very technical and large process into 3 minutes.
Yeah, well, and you got more than 3 minutes for sure, Laura. The thing that strikes me here is that your planning horizon is 2035. No, 2060.
It's a 40-year planning horizon. Every time we do an iterative, so we update the plan every 3 years or so for the next 40 years.
And I'm curious as to your confidence in your modeling that goes out that far, particularly with the particularly climate change, which is as far as I can tell has progressed. The effects of it have progressed faster than the scientists had previously estimated.
Yeah.
So you want to talk about that?
Yeah, I'd love to. And this is a topic that we discuss, my colleagues nationally around the country and I discuss at conferences and in small group meetings a lot, because climate change really, the impacts of climate change really add some uncertainties to what is traditionally used to manage water, whether it's water supply and demand, or whether it's like stormwater or those types of things. The impacts of climate change are really manifested in the water cycle. And so one of the best practices right now, in addition to collaborating with, say, academic institutions and some of our science-based federal agencies, NOAA, for instance, and EPA, we get a lot of data from those sources to inform us. But one of the things that is most important for us is to monitor on a continual basis what's happening in our watersheds and around the region, so that we can adapt and include what we see into the next round of iterative planning. And an example of that monitoring is wildfire risk. So, we're lucky that we haven't had catastrophic wildfires in our watersheds. And in fact, the Little Cottonwood Canyon watershed and other Wasatch watersheds used to be known as, I think people referred to them as the asbestos watersheds, because there was this feeling that they would never burn because they held on to moisture at the high elevations for such a long time. And there were opinions about the health of the forest and that kind of thing. But now when I look at some of my colleagues in California, Colorado, New Mexico, Arizona, we really need to be watching very closely what's happening around fire behavior and mitigating those impacts. And so that kind of bleeds into not just water supply and demand management, but also things like watershed scale planning, which we're also doing on an iterative basis in order to improve security of our water supplies. So that's an example of taking what's happening in the real world and incorporating those into our plans. And our plans are never just something that's set on a shelf. It's always something that we're basing policy and action off of. And when we see new things come in, another example of why that's important is land use changes. So the last update we did of the plan that was just finalized, we did because we hadn't foreseen that we would get a new state prison in our water service area or an inland port, which have significantly different water use, water demand characteristics than what we thought that land use would be, which was residential. So again, it's just all of this monitoring. Things change. You do our best to forecast and project on the best available data, knowing that data is going to constantly be refined and evolving.
We have, the town, I believe, has a contract, and John Goldner can speak to the numbers on this, of surplus water up to a certain amount per year. And do you foresee that might change?
The water supply agreement dated 1976 between Salt Lake City and the town of Alta. I don't see that changing. Are you asking about change and referring, I guess, in reference to the conversation we were just having about water supply and demand planning?
Yeah, that's what I am.
Yeah.
And what I wanted to hear from you is just what you said.
Yeah.
That you don't really foresee it changing.
Yeah. So another thing with our water supply and demand planning is that, the commitments that we have, we hold as a constant in that process, including this commitment that we have with the town of Alta.
And that's excellent, because when we look at the contract, we have, I think, 265,000 gallons a day. But with drought and growth, we're sometimes worried that maybe we're going to have to be cut back a little bit. So, as the mayor said, excellent words, Laura.
Good to see you, John.
And talk about water for snowmaking. How much of that is actually consumed as opposed to essentially recycled?
There's some research around snowmaking efficiency, and most of the research I've seen says that there's about a 20% evaporation rate in the snowmaking process. But that can vary. It can be higher or lower depending on sort of the regional climatic conditions, but we assume it's a 20% loss to evaporation. And then the snow that does stay on the ground, that much of that probably returns to the watershed, although the snowpack itself can evaporate too, as you've seen. But yeah, so we assume a 20% loss to evaporation.
Okay. And when you talk about no change in essentially the allocation of water to our community, I presume that means no change in the allocation for snowmaking either.
That's correct.
Okay.
Yes.
I'd like to get questions from the council and the staff to Laura.
Laura, this is Craig Highmark.
Okay.
First, I think the work you're doing is really important. I also think anybody trying to do a 40-year plan is trying to do something that's close to impossible. So I have a great deal of empathy for somebody who actually has to write that stuff down. Sort of along the lines of Roger's question, regarding climate change. I think, both climate change and population growth has at least vastly exceeded my personal expectations recently. If you go back like 10 years ago, how close to the actual population growth and sort of the water supply from the climate change was your report, I don't know, 10 years ago or 15 years ago?
Well, actually, that's a really great question, because I've actually gone back further than that. Some of the initial planning for water in Salt Lake City. And this goes back to the 1930s and 40s, when some of the water projects were being considered, like Deer Creek Reservoir. That actually, they were right on population. I think they assumed that they would need to serve 425,000 people. And currently we are serving 365,000 estimated. I think the thing that's harder to estimate is land use. So, and the impacts of different land uses on water demand. So, industrial, commercial, or institutional, very different, actually quite a diverse set of impacts. Like a warehouse has a different impact than a water bottling facility. But from just population numbers, I think that one has been a little easier for us to forecast. We use Wasatch Front Regional Council's transportation assessment zones, because our service area doesn't align with one political boundary. Our service area also includes portions of Mill Creek and Cottonwood Heights and Holiday. So anyway, that seems to be a good methodology for us. We've been pretty close over the last many decades of iterative planning.
Thank you.
Thanks.
Okay, some more to Laura. Yeah, John.
Going forward, what kind of growth rates are you assuming over the next 10, 20, 30 years? Is any political will developing to slow down the growth rate? Or is it just pedal to the metal, grow as fast as we can, as far as the eye can see?
That's like the $1 million question. But I think, I think, so for Salt Lake City's service area, by the year 2060, we are estimating another 100,000 more people or so, on top of the 365,000 that we serve currently. But our city is developed, we're pretty developed, with the exception of the northwest quadrant of the city. But in terms of sort of what's happening on a policy level, I don't think on a state level or even local level, people are really talking about growth rates. I think what they're talking about more is what is sustainable, what is smart growth, what is sustainable growth. And an example of that for Salt Lake City is, we noticed once the Inland Port Authority was put into place that we were getting interest from industry that were very, very high water users, like wanting to use 1 to 2 million gallons of water per day, which is about the same as the one Tesoro, which manufactures gas or
fuel, oil, an oil manufacturing facility that's large, very large is on our system, and that's how much they use. But we were getting requests in the inland port for bottling facilities and others that, that's a very large water footprint. So we recently changed our zoning laws to restrict and prohibit any water users siting in our city that use more than 200,000 gallons per day, which is also a large amount of water, but it's kind of on par. We did research about, we have dairies, for instance, on our system, and they use a lot of water, or food manufacturers, those types of things. So we tried to leave ourselves flexible enough for industry that could come in that could bring us a lot of different social benefits, economic benefits, jobs, those types of things, but that were not inappropriate for the resource constraints that we have.
Do you have,
Sustainable growth. It's great to hear you use those words.
yeah,
Because the word sustainable is just absent from the state legislature's approach to growth. So it's encouraging to hear that you're thinking about it in the city.
Thanks, John.
do you have a mandate to supply water to consumers like this, or what?
So a lot of that, where that question can be answered, is in state statutes. And in our service area, our designated water service area, we do have an obligation to treat people equally. That doesn't necessarily mean that we can't say no to providing water to a water user that we don't think is appropriate in our system. But for clarification on that, that's why we passed that zoning ordinance, so that we're very clear to anyone interested that this is the rule that we've imposed in our water area.
Okay. Other questions of Laura? Oh, Sheridan, was that your hand that came up?
Yes, yes, Mayor.
Sheridan.
Hi, Laura. It's great to see you.
Great to see you too.
I often think of you and Governor Herbert quoting Mark Twain, saying that in the West, whiskey's for drinking, but water's for fighting over.
And I have a dog named Whiskey. That's not an accident.
Appropriate. Well, I wish you good courage, and I think you're doing amazing work. Amazing job. When you say 2060 is the year set for moving to more water conservation, can you help me understand, does that mean we're not taking current steps to conserve water more actively?
No, actually, that's a great question, Sheridan. What that means is we've set a 2060 target for conservation, but to get from where we are to that target, we're going to need to reduce the rate of water use. So it's conservation year over year. It's sustained conservation, and which is different than I think the conservation that we've seen during this drought cycle. We've seen an incredible community response to conservation. Last year, we calculated a 2.6 billion gallon savings, and this year a 2.9 billion gallon savings, both close to 20% of what our average is typically. That and actually what we saw these last 2 years is actually really close to what we think our 2060 goal should be. But it was in the context of an emergency drought response. And so we're actually taking all of the lessons that we've learned over the last 2 years to inform, and I get chills when I talk about this, because what a great thing if there's a silver lining in the drought, we get to experience what that kind of conservation looks like, and inform our next round of strategies. So, you know, what was the public response? What were the public's concerns? You know, what do we need to do in terms of landscape and peak demand and those types of things? So, so that's what that 2060, that's a long answer to your question, sorry, but that's what that 2060 number is a target.
Thank you. If you'll bear with me with a follow-up question. You were quoted in the New York Times article about the lake. I found that article frightening. Can you speak to what we can do about the lake? Is the situation as desperately dire as it was sort of painted in that article? Can it recover?
Yeah. One thing I'll say, I thought that New York Times article was great in the way that it brought public attention to the issue, and public attention not only within our state but elsewhere, and really highlighted a lot of important things around climate change and around our ethics and values towards water. It didn't quite go into all of the things that are already happening. And Great Salt Lake is in the basin that feeds Great Salt Lake is huge. It's like 5 counties, 3 states, and I don't know how many cities and irrigation districts, farmland, all of that. But really there's 3 major drainages to Great Salt Lake. It's the Jordan River drainage, the Weber Basin, or the Weber River drainage, and the Bear River drainage, and then actual precipitation. And I think actual precipitation on the lake accounts for about 33% of the inflows. The Bear River is something around 50%. The Jordan River, I think, was 30%. I might be getting these numbers wrong, but it's around the ballpark. But anyway, my point is that in order to make a difference on Great Salt Lake, we need state leadership, because it's really going to require a lot of collective collaboration. And with that state leadership, you know, comes legislation potentially that makes it easier for irrigation districts, water districts, cities, and others to take action to improve flows to Great Salt Lake. And examples of that would be legislation that earmarked funding so that secondary water systems can put meters in, the ones that aren't metered can actually put meters. It also earmarked funding for a trust, a special trust set up called the Great Salt Lake Trust. They put $40 million into that to ensure flows to Great Salt Lake. There's also been legislation on things like land use codes and zoning ordinances, and removing barriers for cities to maybe have more aggressive conservation in landscape codes. They're not working in a vacuum, our legislature. They are working very collaboratively. And I really think this has become a great example of nonpartisan collaboration between state governments, local governments, non-governmental organizations. So because of that,
Uh-oh.
Like we lost Laura.
Oh no.
We'll never lose Laura. She might not be back tonight.
Mayor Burke, you are muted.
Yeah.
We'll see if we can get her back though.
You think we can
It
get her
does
back?
look like it's on her end.
While there are advantages of using Zoom, there are a few disadvantages too. This is the kind of thing we run into now and then.
She's back,
She's back.
almost.
Well, frankly, it's great to hear from Laura. And, oh, there she is. All
Sorry
right.
about that. Anyway, sorry about that. This happens at my work computer sometimes.
It happens to all of us. Don't
Okay.
apologize.
So hopefully Sheridan, I addressed your question. I think I was just saying that I have some optimism because this has been a really great collective effort and an example of nonpartisan policymaking over the last, since about 2018. There's been, I'll say I've spent hundreds and hundreds of hours in interim legislative sessions working through these issues.
Okay, anything else for Laura before we move on? All right, thank you much, Laura. We look forward to seeing you again, and let's not wait so long until you come back.
All right. Thank you, Roger. Thanks, everybody.
Thanks, Laura. Great to see you.
Yes.
Bye.
Excellent overview.
Thank you.
Okay, our next item on the agenda is the UDOT project overview for the Little Cottonwood Canyon Environmental Impact Statement, and the leader of that is Josh Ventura, who I believe is up now. Yes, there he is. Yeah, good. Okay, take it away.
Well, thank you, Mayor. I just wanted to confirm and make sure that we're using the best use of everybody's time. I was thinking of potentially doing a 10-minute overview really quick. I know many of the members of the city are familiar with the document, and then opening the remaining time for questions and answers, but tell me how I can best help.
Well, let me start off by suggesting that you repeat the conversation we had a little earlier, because that got some attention here.
Absolutely. So I'm going to start, and I relayed this information to Blake over at CWC and Mayor Knoop with Brighton. But I found a discrepancy in what I stated at the CWC meeting last week and what is written in the actual final EIS. So when you look at the final EIS under the tolling or the occupancy restrictions, and why I don't have it open so I can just read it to you right now, I apologize. But section 2.4.2, I believe, states residents of Little Cottonwood Canyon, drivers of service vehicles, and resort employees may potentially be exempt from the vehicle occupancy requirements. Last week, I stated that in a more definitive way, saying that they would not. I fear that I misspoke there, and I acknowledge that I very well could have been wrong. I need to do more research is the short answer, and get with our traffic demand management specialist and see which code of federal regulations we think provides that avenue. So I'm not, I fear that I misspoke and I need to do more research. So I'm still in the not 100% certain phase.
In either direction.
In either direction, right? I'm certainly not as confident as I was last week after reading that statement.
Okay. Yeah, I was quite surprised when you told us in the CWC meeting that but for 50 days a year, people wouldn't, single occupants in, for instance, residents here would not be allowed up, which was startling. I was thinking that one of our council members is an ER doc, works in the valley, lives in Alta. I thought if she were on a night shift and came home at 7 a.m. and couldn't get home, that would not be too cool.
That would be an unacceptable solution for pretty much anybody. I understand that.
So
Maybe I could just get a blow up for the car.
yeah, I was thinking this might incentivize inflatable passengers, which have occupied a lot of HOV lanes elsewhere in the country.
Is there anything else? I fear that I can't expand much more than that. Just
On
based
that
on my,
subject.
but I'm happy to potentially and hopefully answer any more questions on that topic. And I just would like to say I'm sorry for any concern that brought forth. Again, we don't think 23 CFR 166 is a viable pathway. But there may be others, and that's what we need to do research on. So I apologize. I very well may have misspoken in this situation.
Good. We can sleep again. So talk about the phased approach. What are the phases? What does that mean?
Sure.
What comes what? What does what?
So as you're aware, right, in the preferred alternative, gondola B was identified with a phased implementation, because we recognize, and if anybody understands this, I'm sure it's the people in this meeting, but Little Cottonwood has a real problem with traffic currently, right? Last winter, we certainly saw it, and I'm expecting that we'll see it again this winter. So because there is that funding constraint, and recognizing that, honestly, we don't know how long it'll take to potentially secure any of the funding methodologies, right? So federal funding, state funding, and or private funding. We need something in the short term, right? And we don't have necessarily a lot of details on what the first phase would entail, because it would be based on phasing. So there is a lack of detail there, because it's really dependent on what monies would be available. But the thought process is we know that people ride the buses, right? The bus actually has really good ridership rates when there's parking available. So we want to both improve and increase the bus service within the budget, provide more parking so that that bus service can be fully utilized, and also implement tolling, or single occupancy and or occupancy requirements. We've focused more on tolling, or you've probably heard me talk more about tolling, because currently there's no automated occupancy detection systems that we have confidence in, short of a human, right? Just automated, the technology isn't there, but we do believe it's close. But those three items, especially because our traffic volumes are not at 2050, right? I mean, like Laura just mentioned, we've seen population growth. It's great to hear that, you know, her projections have been so in line with where they've come in at. We've also used population growth metrics. We've utilized the Kemsey Gardner Institute more at a county level than a city level. So I couldn't actually confirm her numbers versus our numbers when I heard her say that. But those are really the first three things. Would be improved and increased bus service, additional parking so that bus service is utilized, and the implementation of a traffic demand or traffic management demand to incentivize that public transit use so we can get that 30% reduction in traffic and help stabilize traffic flows so that when you're driving home at 8 o'clock after a midnight shift, you can get home in a timely manner and not get stuck in what's commonly referred to as the white snake, right? The morning up.
Laura talked about population growth. Is your assumption or model that the number of visitors to Little Cottonwood Canyon would be proportionate to the population in the Wasatch Front?
So I have a phone a friend. I actually have two phone a friends here.
Phone a friends?
Well, also joining me as panelists are Lance Koval with the Forest Service and Terry Warner with HDR. He's the project manager from the consultant. So I believe I know the answer, but based on the fact that I misspoke without asking Terry last week, I am going to go ahead and ask the person who probably has a better idea than I do, just to make sure I don't, you know, create a trend. 1 point is just a point. 2 points starts making a line and that leads to a trend. So I'm trying to avoid that. So Terry, would you please save me here to make sure I'm not misspeaking?
Yeah, sure. What we used for the growth projections for Winter Canyon use through 2050 was about a 1.9% annual growth rate, which is probably a little bit less than the countywide projections of growth, especially considering the 2 to 3% growth forecast for northern Utah County. It's probably slightly less than that for Salt Lake County, but we didn't quite take that same growth rate and apply it to the canyon. We kind of used the historical growth rate over the last 10 years or so and just projected that into the future to get to our 2050 traffic demands.
I'm really glad I asked you, Terry, because I thought the number was 1.2. So thank you.
One thing I would observe is that the summer demand has, or the summer visitation has grown dramatically, and particularly on these Oktoberfest days where there's roadside parking from, you know, a mile above Snowbird to a mile below Snowbird, both sides. Any long-term solution you have is not going to affect that next year. What do you have in mind for next year?
So that would, right, UDOT unfortunately and fortunately is a very large organization. So we are looking at the environmental impacts associated with the alternatives. That's honestly a better question for our operations group. Obviously we do coordinate with them. As you're aware, Mayor, I attend, you know, the monthly Canyon users meeting, but I very specifically try and remain silent in that meeting because that is an operations meeting. I would direct you towards Kendall Draney, who's the district engineer, for those short-term operational changes possibilities. Honestly, I've heard talk of changes, but I don't know how they've progressed.
Okay,
Sorry,
Uh,
Mr. Burke, I need to correct myself. Josh, you would have been correct. 1.2% annual growth
Oh.
rate. So between the two of us, we'll probably get it right one of these days.
Well, I'm glad that you have the document open on your other screen, so thank you.
okay, let me ask anybody else here who wants to offer questions or talk to Josh. Council members.
I'm sure there's questions, right? There has to be.
Sheridan. Yeah, Sheridan.
Thank you for joining us, Josh. Are the phased implementation solutions, do they include dedicated express bus lanes, 2 hours, say in the morning, 2 hours in the afternoon?
So under the current, what's assumed they do not. Essentially, there is no additional widening proposed in the canyon as part of this phase 1 busing plan.
Yes, thank you. So my question is actually not with regard to widening. It has to do with just using the current infrastructure and dedicating different times for access up and down canyon.
So for all residents, I just want to make sure I'm answering the right question, right? Because there is sections of the canyon that has 2 lanes. And of course, there's also sections that have 3 lanes, both up and down.
So some have proposed that one way to use our current infrastructure and not spend any more, except perhaps on additional buses, would be to have express bus lanes open to incentivize people getting out of their cars and riding public transportation that would have swifter access if the dedicated up lane for those was just a couple hours in the morning or even 1 hour. Similarly, in the afternoon, dedicated express bus lanes in the afternoon, not requiring any road expansion, but just as an incremental phased implementation step to begin to try and get some more cars out of the canyon.
And again, I just want to make sure, right? So is this proposing eliminating private vehicles for the creation of those express bus lanes?
Potentially, or with a combination of carpooling required.
So I think that leads to some of the same concerns of eliminating, and honestly, partly controlling how that would function. But that is not currently part of the consideration. I think that's worth adding to any private or public comment that's submitted. But that is not currently included. Also, just to follow up on Laura's, my dog's name is Kessler. I know it's the wrong canyon. She's a little terrier, blue heeler, COVID pup. So it's not as cool as Whiskey, but that's my little running partner.
Carolyn, you want to say something? Unmute.
So did you change the downhill passing lane in an effort to try and figure out whether that was going to get more people in the canyon faster? Or maybe that isn't totally your wheelhouse, but I assume that there's some studying going on with changing traffic patterns merely by changing where you decide people can pass on the road.
So that was part of our operations group in an effort to see if there's ways by changing the merge points to allow for smoother merges. With every action, there's also reactions, right? Moving that merge point lower did cause additional cars to be under, I will say, concerning slide paths. But UDOT and the creation of the uphill merge lane at the mouth was an effort to help with ingress. The goal was never to get more people in the canyon. I just want to clarify that. The goal is to make traffic smoothly flow to minimize congestion and travel time. Our goal is not to add more people to the canyon, but to have the most efficient transportation system we can. And I know that's probably what you're meaning.
No, it's just, it's interesting. My husband and I were talking about how, oh gosh, what do they do now? And that has been my reaction to many of the changes. And then I sit with it for a while and I'm like, wow, that was really brilliant. But this recent one of stopping the passing lane at that corner, I'm like, wow. So if you don't pass somebody by Snowbird, you're not passing for the remainder of your ride down the canyon. And I'm trying to picture how large the red snake is going to get and whether that's some type of a design to demonstrate how difficult it is to get out of the canyon. That was sort of where my thoughts were.
It was obviously an engineered solution with the hopes of improving traffic flow. And the good thing is paint striping is easily fixable. It might leave we call them ghost lines, right? I think y'all get why we call them ghost lines when you remove them, but it's something that obviously the best intention is to fix traffic flow, and generally it's low cost and also low risk.
Okay, Chris wanted to say something.
Yeah, I guess I was just going to chime in and offer that removing the downhill merge has been a topic of conversation in our monthly Little Cobham Canyon Road operations meetings. And I think anecdotally, I'm not an operations person. I just listen to some of them talk. Sometimes that point, the downhill side of that where traffic has to merge back into one lane is a common place for congestion, slide offs, and other accidents. So I'm actually, we've been talking about it for a few years now. I'm sort of surprised that it took as long as it did to implement it, but it's certainly been interesting to drive up and down the canyon and have that same realization as Carolyn that, oh yeah, this is my place in line for the day. So.
Okay, one thing I would say here as we close that I would encourage everyone to make their comments on the EIS. Those comments are due, I learned today, at midnight on the 17th, not at 5 p.m., which I had previously assumed. And Josh, is there guidelines or restrictions on the comments, or must they follow a certain format or address a specific item within the 10,000 page document, or what exactly?
Well, I would remind everybody, so just one thing, it's actually a little bit before midnight. It's 11:59:59. I know we're talking about a second here, but it's amazing how many people are going to submit at 12:03 a.m. on the next day. But I think it's important to know that the comment period isn't designed to be a voting system, right? We do want to hear new ideas. I think one you brought up about the potentiality of uphill express bus lanes and restricting traffic, like that's a great comment. Whether phasing metrics, I know we've talked about that, Mayor. Again, if there is something in the document that you feel we didn't analyze correctly, we didn't analyze at all, right? So those are the comments we are really looking for to make sure that we have the most accurate and complete document. So I would target comments around that sort of mindset, if that makes sense.
Great. Any other questions for Josh? Oh, Sheridan.
Josh, what would you say to folks that feel discouraged in this process, who feel that they strongly voiced their opinions, their opinion was against the gondola, and that there's no point in making a comment going forward? How would you encourage them?
I would say there absolutely is a point in making comments. I personally read every single comment of the 14,000 that came in. There has been just over 6,700 comments that have come in this far in the process. I'm currently on about 6,100. It's pretty hard to keep up when you have meetings as well, right? Which is why it takes a while after the comment period. I personally try and call a handful of people every day that leave comments just to talk and hear what their concerns are and maybe answer questions, but get a better understanding. With 6,700 comments, I can't call everybody, right? But I generally try and choose a couple people every day and reach out to them to get a better understanding. And I think that shows that we care. I certainly care, right? I moved here. I first came here 25 years ago on a family ski trip. And we did, the standard 4-resort tour in 7 days. And that was March. And I moved here in September of that same year. We need public input to make sure that we thoroughly understand all the concerns and have the most accurate document. I don't know that there's a solution that is going to appease all the Canyon users' concerns.
I do. There won't be.
Thank you for saying that. I was trying to be delicate about it. Right. There is staunch proponents of the cog rail that unfortunately removes 100+ climbing boulders. Right. The cog rail has its merits. I would argue that Salt Lake Climbers Alliance is very against it. Right. I think everybody's input is part of the process and it's important. That being said, I don't know that no matter what is chosen, 100% of the population is going to like whatever the preferred alternative that's identified in the ROD is. But I think it's important that they comment so we have all the information prior to making that decision.
Okay. Anybody else want to speak? Again, I would encourage everybody to make their input.
I'll just ask a quick comment. Are you as discouraged about the UTA reduction in service as we are? I mean, it seems largely inconsistent with your effort.
So on a personal level, right, this is not UDOT speaking. This is Josh, the Canyon user and skier speaking. Of course I am, right? I think the buses are utilized. I certainly take them when I don't have the option to carpool with my friends. That being said, I also understand the position they're in. Right. UDOT is down many plow drivers. Let me just say that, right? We're having the same hiring problems for a very similar position. And in all honesty, our plow driver requirements are lower than that of a bus driver, right? For background checks, driving histories. I mean, you think about if you're trusting your life to somebody else's hands, I want them to be the best darn driver that they can hire. I mean, Del Taco's paying $17 right now. Park City's hiring snow removal for $29 right now. I understand the situation they're in, and I think it's important to note that they cut service across 4 different counties. Right. So it wasn't just ski routes that they targeted. The Salt Lake PC Connect has been severely reduced. Ski service in Davis County has been reduced. They're in a pickle, right? And really, I feel for them, but I would say we're looking at a long-term planning solution here. And I think we all hope that this is a short-term labor blip, right? That certainly does not extend to 2050. And hopefully the Fed is successful in their soft landing and we can, get restaurant employees and bus drivers and engineers and all those positions we see advertised for filled up so we can get back to pre-COVID normal.
Yep. So you don't think it reflects that just not drinking the Kool-Aid on the bus alternative? It's really more of a mechanical function with respect to their labor situation.
I absolutely believe it's a function of the fact that they can't hire because, like I said, we're in the same boat.
Thank you.
So I'm having a hard time digesting 2 of your comments. The first one was your comment about this is not a voting machine, that the comment period. And I understand that. At the same time, one would hope that as public servants that hopefully have some role in the democratic process, that if the overwhelming bulk of people are opposed to this, that you guys would either stop the project or at least consider alternatives that you haven't considered. So that's my first comment. My second one was, you made a comment that the objective is not to get more people up the canyon. While that may or may not be the objective, I'm having a hard time envisioning a solution that you propose that doesn't have that effect. So it may be a collateral effect, not the main objective, but I think a lot of the concern that I've heard voiced is about overuse of the canyon. And if you guys were really only trying to solve the peak loading problem, I would think that solutions like Sheridan proposed, which is, all right, we'll ban normal street traffic for 2 hours in the morning and an hour or 2 hours in the afternoon, and only allow buses up, would solve the peak loading problem without necessarily bringing a lot more people up into the canyon.
So, and there was more than 2 questions in there. So if I don't answer your complete question, please remind me. But I would say that, the NEPA is a process, right? And it's public input is very much a part of that process. But it's really designed to help decision makers understand what the environmental impacts associated with an action are, right? And that's what the process is designed to do. So how well an alternative meets the project's purpose and need, and what the environmental impacts, along with public input, are truly how a decision or a preferred alternative is identified. Does that cover all the question 1 answers?
It's an answer. Absolutely.
I am certainly open to discussing, right? That's why we're here, is this open back and forth dialogue. And so there are some restrictions in what UDOT and state entities can do with roadways that are on the national network. To go back to the idea of eliminating uphill traffic for buses only, I think that would most likely raise many of the same concerns as for residents that single occupancy vehicles. And it sounds like there was, may I politely say, robust discussion regarding that concept. So that may not be well received for residents of Alta as well, right?
Yeah, I wasn't advocating a specific solution. I was actually just making the point that if your statement was, we're just trying to make the traffic more efficient, not have a lot more people come up the canyon. And I'm saying, I don't know that any of your solutions are not going to result. I think they're going to result in a lot more people coming up the canyon.
So, and that is a true statement. And I don't know that I would use the word a lot, but I would say more. The FEIS does estimate that on the busiest days, there could potentially be, and again, Terry, fact check me on this, 2,200 additional people entering the canyon on those busiest days, if essentially everybody chose to pay the toll. We also recognize that some people would be discouraged by the toll and may choose other destinations. But that is not our goal, but we recognize the potential impact of it. So I think we agree to that, and we're just saying it in sort of different ways.
Yeah, I don't know the exact numbers, but you're right. We do, identify the potential for increases during the winter to the resorts, right? We've talked to the resorts who say that, we can handle that type of increase. Because these transit alternatives wouldn't operate in the summer, it doesn't really put additional people at the trailheads during the summer because there's not a peak hour congestion problem during the summer, right? The traffic is more spread out. So these alternatives are really just meant to address the winter peak, and it's most of those people are going to the resorts who, I'm sure there's lots of opinions, but the resorts say they can handle some increase in skiers.
And Lance, I'll give you a minute to talk there, because I would guess your next question is, well, aren't the resorts going to expand because of this increased visitation? And Ben said it very well the other day. And obviously he couldn't make it today. So hopefully, I'm confident you can do it just as well as Ben said it the other day.
No, I can speak to that. So in our land management plan, the ski area, on the topic of ski area resort boundaries, our land management plan or forest plan does not allow the expansion of those boundaries. As some of you are probably aware, in the Mountain Accord proposed legislation, there was some discussion of some adjustment in boundaries, but outside of a congressional act or change in the forest plan, we would not entertain expanding those boundaries of the ski areas. Additionally, we manage the ski areas as an area of high use. With that said, under the ski area permits, we put the management of those visitors and the safety of those visitors in the hands of the ski resorts. We do not get involved in their business plans. So we don't set quotas on or limits on how many people they can maintain or manage within their ski area safely, and obviously maintain a high level of experience so that they continue to get customers. So the UDOT's proposed alternatives here, based on our analysis, being that they're only delivering people to the ski areas. Granted, the understanding some of those people will go outside of that, but our assumption is that the bulk of those people will be going to these areas to ski, given that these solutions are for, as Josh mentioned, peak congestion days, which could be corresponded to peak powder days, if you will. So by that, from the Forest Service perspective, we're delivering these people to an area that is managed for that high use. We're not providing additional access to any of our developed trailheads or campgrounds or anything below those ski areas. And so, from our perspective, this is an inadequate proposal for the management of visitors coming into the canyon during these periods.
What we conclude in the EIS is that because these transit alternatives have limited numbers of parking outside of the canyon, that we estimate about 2,300 additional people on the busiest ski days in 2050 under the alternatives.
And I guess one thing to add on to that too is UDOT is not proposing to increase the parking capacity in the canyon. In fact, Josh, Terry, correct me, but I think on the net gain loss, we're coming up with 17 less additional spots for capacity, correct?
17 in below entry one and approximately 230 above entry one.
But
So
a
roughly
decrease,
200
correct?
and 250 is quite a significant decrease in overall parking stalls.
And just, some of you are probably familiar with this, but in our forest plan, there's a desired future condition to maintain canyon parking levels at year 2000 levels. For better or for worse, the way that was written into our plan, we didn't have an explicit number of parking capacity in our forest plan. In 2012, Avenue Consultants did a study where they actually surveyed the capacity of the canyon. And the Forest Service has been using that as a management tool. And through our collaboration with UDOT, we recommended they use that as a tool, again, to tabulate and make sure that we weren't increasing parking in the canyon or increasing parking capacity. Because again, our desired future condition uses that as a limitation on the number of vehicles that can go into the canyon, thereby reducing the number of people, primarily for watershed protection.
Well, one thing I'm very confident of, and that is that this canyon's not going to get any bigger. And the more people you bring in, the more people per fixed area will result. We're kind of over time here, and Josh, is there a way that others can continue this conversation with you offline?
Certainly. Sheridan, I saw that you had your hand raised.
Well, she's actually up next on the agenda.
Well, I will offer up probably 60% of the people on this phone call have my phone number anyways. So I am happy to just give you my phone number. It's also on our website, and it's not very well, it's pretty up front and center. So you can certainly find it in under 5 minutes. But if there's other questions that you want to follow up on, tomorrow, Friday before the comment period, or just next week or next month, if I just say my phone number, are you okay to write it down?
Yeah, do it.
801-231-8452.
Okay.
And I will answer if I can, or I'll try and call you back promptly.
Okay, Sheridan, you wanted to say something here at the end.
Just swiftly, if I may, Mayor, just because it's unique that we have all of these constituents on the call. Because of all of the things you've stated with regard to not wanting more people in the canyon necessarily, or delivering to the resorts that say that they can handle that capacity, or looking at our capacity based on the limits that we have in place, which are parking, essentially. It has begged the question, and it is a comment that I've made through your process. Why no scientifically based human capacity study? And not just one, but multiples. Why are we relying on what the resorts tell us their capacity is, what you tell us your capacity is pegged to, which is parking, and not look at actual studies that could be commissioned that would examine the question, what can this environment hold in terms of the number of people within it without deleteriously affecting Elta and Little Cottonwood Canyon?
So Lance, as the agency with regulatory authority here, I'm gonna turn this one over to you.
So currently, and again, some of you may be aware of this, but as part of our forest plan, we do biennial monitoring for the plan, which includes looking across the spectrum at the entire forest. The forest's current position on capacity in the canyon is that we believe on what we're seeing in the canyon, that the canyon itself can actually withstand more people than we're seeing now. Granted, the COVID influx, this may change as on our next monitoring as we see what happens. But currently, we're seeing that the limiting factor is basically infrastructure at our sites, our trailheads, restrooms, etc. But we're not seeing the drastic impacts based on our forest plan monitoring that would dictate that the Forest Service would have to take any type of action to limit capacity. With that said, and this is a tool and mentioned in our forest plan as a potential future option, the forest only way to do that would be to go to a permit system. And right now we're managing impacts as we see them on a case-by-case basis, limited to the areas where we're seeing those impacts. A permit system would be considered by the forest supervisor if we were seeing more widespread impacts that mandated that the forest considered limiting people in those areas. But again, based on our monitoring, what we're seeing is that more people, that the canyon could handle more people. What number, I don't know, because again, we're just doing that on our monitoring. But to date, we're not seeing the need to implement a permit system or limit people in the canyon. And that's, I will say that's not, the Forest Service has no intent or, I will say funding to endeavor on, the study that you mentioned. But it's, there have been other proposals, and I know several of you here are involved with the CWC, through their environmental dashboard, the human element, as they discussed. I know that was discussed since the Mountain Accord days. I know I had sit in many of those meetings when, that type of analysis was approved. So it's not something the forest would not say, don't do that. Because I think if someone were able to fund and take on that study, obviously the results would be very useful for all the jurisdictions in the canyon to help them manage that capacity. But again, right now, our tool in our forest plan is the biennial monitoring that we use, as well as our national visitor use monitoring, which obviously tends more towards the quality of the recreation experiences in the canyon, which we're also trying to maintain.
Thank you.
And that's why I brought co-presenters, so we could answer more thoroughly in the time allotted. So thank you, Lance. And thanks also, Terry.
All right. And thank you, Josh. I think we will, unless there's any burning items, let's go over to Sheridan and affordable housing. You're muted. There you go.
If you'll all indulge me, I'll ask that we suspend our disbelief about this topic for the moment to entertain the real possibilities of achieving affordable housing ownership in Elta on the ground sooner rather than later. Politics is, as I aspire to make it so, the art of the possible. So my thinking around this has been informed in this document that I'm referencing is on our town website, and you can take a look at it. A couple of different presentations that came up at the Mountain Town Resorts and Planning Summit in 2019 that John Goldner was able to attend, and he was kind enough to share some of the links to that supporting material. My biggest takeaway from those two presentations that I referenced that everyone can see on our town website are that we need different metrics to look at community success when we're looking at the issue of opportunity or affordable housing. Some of those metrics might include the idea of what creates community profit or what creates community return on investment. And I think that as we look at it as a council, the legacy that we create as people in government, what we're able to do that other institutions might not be able to do. I do think, and in reading in the document I already created, bear with me, those of you who scanned it thoroughly, but I do think we're incredibly fortunate in Elta, since it was a requirement of most of the businesses to have employees in place because of the avalanche nature avalanche prone nature of our community, employee housing is just baked into the mix. And we're very fortunate. And I think that makes us ahead of most other comparable areas in North America. But I think that we've reached the upper limit of that. And certainly there will always be more demand than supply on this issue. We also fortunately have ordinances in place that make caretaking in different units within house in town very, very attractive. It reduces people's tax burden by almost a full 0.5%, 45 basis points. And there are many people that are doing that within town. It does just require that an actual live-in more than 6 months in a day caretaker be on site. And so that's something that we might have more room for within our town in terms of actual spaces for people. But I do think some of the impediments that people have brought up before, saying that we don't have the land or we don't have the buildings or we don't have the funds, aren't true for us anymore. We do have buildings that have beds currently. We have Central, we have our current town community center, and we also have our town offices. And I think that there's opportunity there to look at creative reuse or even tear down and rebuild in the case of our current community center that might centralize the possibility of real ownership for people that we would determine as a community qualified to be part of potentially a lottery to live in Elta. And I think the benefits for that are tremendous. I think it actually builds community to have more people that live here year round and work here year round. I think it gets people off the roads, frankly. It's better for the environment. And I think it centralizes, and perhaps the most radical thing that I say in this presentation, the idea that the people that generate our tax revenue are the workers of Elta. And in using that tax revenue as part of our town budget, we should centralize their interests. So there it is, folks. I'd love to hear your thinking around it. Again, I ask that you suspend perhaps all the reasons you think this can't be done and consider, based on some of the supporting materials that I've shared in these very brief thoughts, ways that this might be possible for us. And thank you for your time.
Questions, comments? Mr. Sheridan?
Just that I really enjoy your passion, Sheridan, and I do see a day when that's a real possibility. And I thank you for continuing to bring it up. I don't see an immediate solution, but I do think it's really, really important for our community. So thank you.
John, you're unmuted.
Yeah, I think the first step is likely to be the most difficult. How many units would you see as being a successful start? Are you thinking it's 4, 6, 8 units, or are you thinking the first step should be 40 units or 50 units?
Off the top of my head, I think just one. One would be
No project too small. No project too small.
Yes. Let's start.
I think that's a good direction.
Yeah.
But I do love, as a follow-up, John, and thank you for the question. I do love some of the links that I shared in that document that show how many communities are way ahead of us on this issue. Many similar mountain town communities. Granted, they're different than Elta. Elta's special in all the best ways. But they've had a multi-directional or shotgun approach, and I'd love to see us adopt that as well. And no project too small, even just rental, although I think that I have wanted to consider ownership primarily, but increasing the rental pool, increasing the ownership possibilities through deed restrictions, looking at real estate transaction taxes, looking at short-term rental taxes to fund these things, looking at buildings that aren't currently occupied or only occupied very briefly and seeing if we can work with owners, seeing if people want to create legacies through deed restrictions that would allow greater access for affordability. These are just some of the ideas. Oh.
You're a brave person. The problem of housing for lower income people pervades the whole society. And I admire you for even trying to attack this. Don't stop.
I think
Thank
one of the bright lights John mentioned last meeting, and I'm not exactly sure how this actually becomes a reality, but us being open to people adding manager units to their homes is probably one of the most pragmatic approaches to getting some additional housing stock. And I was thought maybe John might want to comment on that process, or how you feel that works with our current zoning, or do we need to make any zoning changes to facilitate that?
We don't need to make any zoning changes, and I think it's worked very well in the past. But about 10 years ago, we require every commercial business to have on-site live-ins. We beg people building houses to put caretaker units in. And originally, the caretaker units were supposed to be smaller, clearly incidental to the main unit, and were to be occupied by caretakers for caretaking services only, no rent. So keep the pipes from freezing, pick people up at the airport, shovel, just keep an eye on the place, and you've got a great place to live. We know that everybody paid rent, but it was small, so it was small enough that nobody really made an issue of it. A number of years ago, that changed. There was a push, part of the caretaker unit, and now that I'm talking to myself, yeah, there is some zoning regulations that we could change. Part of the caretaker unit restriction initially was that the owner could not be his own caretaker. You couldn't have any interest or ownership in the house and be a caretaker. Well, that was amended, I don't know, 15 years ago or so. So we've seen at least one incident where basically that means you can build a house with 2 stories, and 1 story is the owner. The second story is the owner acting as a caretaker, and the second story is rented out. So I think effectively that cut out the possibility of a lot of caretakers, because it would allow the owners to live there, make money renting out their place. So anybody can do, we really pushed it when people were initially building their houses. I think if somebody wanted to convert part of their house to a caretaker unit, they'd have to come back and ask the planning commission, but we definitely would look at that favorably. And that was kind of one of the things that they talked about in this recent Utah League of Cities and Towns conference. They said, you have to grow, municipalities should grow organically, slowly, and intermittently out and up. And the guy gave this example of, okay, your kids are gone, the dog is gone, you're in this 5-bedroom house with nobody but yourself. Why not knock off or enclose a couple of the back bedrooms, build a kitchen, and rent that out? So that's what people would be doing in Alta if they wanted to convert to a caretaker unit if they didn't have one. And a lot of places already have them. I'm not sure they're being used. And Sheridan is painfully aware of what happens when properties change hands.
Mm-hmm.
So, it would be nice if we could get something more stable, and we really push the caretaker unit. And I guess we could push conversion of existing structures that don't have caretakers to caretaker units. It'd be pretty easy. The one thing in the back of my mind, though, is it's like, okay, we can convert this house to a caretaker unit, but you have to have at least 1 on-site parking spot, because there is no more parking along the road. So, we can deal with all of that, but we can deal with that, and we do push it. And I don't know how I get the ball rolling on existing houses, but we're doing it. We did it on all the old ones.
Well, definitely, as you look at the land conundrum which is the biggest obstacle to getting off the mark on this. You know, converting a portion of your existing house or doing an addition to your existing house seems like a more pragmatic and more likely to have a positive outcome than any other ideas that have been floating around, because really there aren't any other ideas floating around. You know, there's just no land for it. So I think to look within is probably if we're going to find a solution, I think it probably lies there.
Right. And a lot of these other places that Sheridan mentioned, you know, we're a little bit different. We're a lot of it different. I mean, some of these places, I remember the way to go about it is, number one, council approval. Number two, study how many people really would want housing, how many people are housed now, what's the deficit, and then funding. And then people would go, I mean, these other municipalities would go a couple miles outside of the city and buy land and build apartments. We're not doing that. So we have to look at what we have, and the future community center, retrofitting existing houses. I mean, there are a lot of things we can do. Sheridan,
Okay.
the button.
Further discussion on this?
Just a couple of comments. First, like you, Roger, I commend tackling this problem. I strongly believe in local communities, and I think local communities have diverse income bases. That said, I think we have been fortunate because the avalanches forced us to do some stuff, and frankly, the tax policy around the the tax rate you could get for having a caretaker unit is pretty significant. So I think that's actually a really good incentive. I think looking forward, I think the incremental stuff that John is talking about, which is, maybe we just make it easy for the zoning changes or whatever are needed to do it, is probably the most practical short-term stuff. Long run, as we look at building community centers or other stuff, there may well be some stuff freed up. The only thing I would say is, I think I would be inclined more towards having the city build those and then rent it, because I think the issue here is not low income housing, it's actually worker housing. And you don't know if a worker is going to be a worker every year. So ownership becomes fairly problematic, but renting, on an annual basis to workers might be an easier solution.
Good point. And one of, this is an unintended byproduct of people getting the 45% property tax evaluation. Their valuations went down by 45% as it applies to countywide property taxes. That's not why we did this. But all of a sudden, it looks like on the one hand, we're losing a lot of revenue because if people aren't using their houses or they're renting them out, and if a caretaker's in there as a full-time resident, the county counts them as the whole entire house is a primary residence, resident occupied, eligible for a 45% reduction in value. So,
Interesting that has not resulted in, as far as I know, big increase in the number of houses essentially adopting caretakers.
No, it hasn't. It's a strange byproduct, but maybe forgetting about the lack of income from the property tax, we could push that a little bit.
Well, I think another portion of that is the VRBO, the growth in VRBO and short-term rental. And maybe part of the solution is also to try to rein in short-term rental. I know a number of the HOAs have done that. The HOA I'm part of we have no short-term rental anymore. 30-day minimum on all our leases. And maybe at some point that certainly other resort towns are looking at that as an option and limiting the amount of VRBO. And maybe that would also help.
Well,
there's probably no one single magic wand that gets this done. It's going to be 10 things all working in concert that get it done.
Right. Definitely. And like the mayor of Park City, the previous mayor of Park City lived in a residential neighborhood. And that's one of the things that a lot of these other agencies are doing. It's like, okay, we're going to approve your subdivision, John. You've got 10 lots, but 30% of them have to be moderate income housing. Or maybe you'll get an extra couple if you provide a couple of moderate income housing. So a lot of these places have more land and regular subdivisions, and the things that are already built, like the mayor in Park City said, everything on my lot, everything in my block is being Airbnb'd, and the people don't live here anymore. I don't know who my neighbors are, and they're making a boatload of money and nobody's living there. And so no one can afford to come in and buy those houses because the people that own them and don't really want to use them that much anymore are just renting them out. So we're not the same as other people, but we don't have the same problems as a lot of those other people. So.
Yep.
Thank you, everyone.
Yeah. As we predicted, we didn't find the golden goose in this one. I'd like, and thank you, Sheridan, for tackling this again. The next thing on the agenda is Mike Mon. I don't know where he is in terms of admission. We're half an hour behind. Maybe he's given up on us.
So Mike wouldn't be able, I see Eleanor on there. How they doing, Ellen? Mike was not going to be able to be here tonight. But he said if Alan wanted to say anything, or if anybody had any questions specifically for Alan, he's here to answer them.
Can you see me, John?
We can hear you. We
Yeah,
can't see you yet.
All right. Good afternoon. Good to see each one of you. Hope you're having a good fall. Mike's traveling. He asked me to mention a couple of things. We appreciate the collaborative approach taken by the town with the stakeholders throughout the community on the noise ordinance issue, and thank you for all the hard work of all of you. Preseason sales are about the same as last year. We've changed our partnership position with the Icon network. Icon base passes will not be valid at Alta this coming season. And we estimate that, here I can start the video, I see now. We're estimating that that will reduce 10 to 15% the Icon visitations. We are finishing summer projects and preparing for winter operations. Due to delays of some of the component parts for the new Sunnyside lift, Palma does not believe that it will be operational by the Friday before Thanksgiving. We're working with them on a revised schedule. Hopefully it'll work out as favorably as it can. We're working towards launching preseason parking reservations around the middle of next week. We will be submitting comments to UDOT on the EIS, and particularly some comments on the phased approach. Some of the changes we are requesting to be included in the discussion or for review are keeping two-wheel drive vehicles without proper traction devices out of the canyon from November 1 till April 30, improving shoulders down canyon to allow queuing up of vehicles when the canyon is closed for avalanche mitigation work, reducing the time required for avalanche mitigation work, staging a snow plow station in the canyon, and improving the merge of traffic exiting Alta with the snowbird traffic. Be happy to try to answer any questions you have.
Well, Alan, the topic many of us are interested in is not when Sunnyside, not, it is not when is the earliest date that Sunnyside will open, but when is the latest date that Sunnyside will open?
And we don't know that. Palma's trying to get us the revised schedule, and we just don't have that at this point.
Okay.
What we are doing is we're starting internal discussions for different time points. If we don't have it by Thanksgiving, what do? If we don't have it by December 15th, what do? If we don't have it by December 22nd, what do?
Okay, good idea. Any other questions of Alan?
Yes,
Oh.
please.
Yeah, go.
Alan, thank you for the update. Do you have a sense when all the pieces are in play, how long access will be limited to the area where that needs to be built?
We don't, we're working on that. We're trying to figure out to have minimal impact. When we fly the towers, which may be towards the end of the month, then we will need to restrict access during that time period. When the cable is involved, then we will need to restrict access. But again, that will be part of just understanding when they're going to have the parts and pieces and when they can do things. I was encouraged this morning when I came that we had 2 semis that had loads of parts, shift trains. I think most of the towers are here. So we can work on those things. The part that we're going to be waiting on is the ring and pinion for the bull wheel. And they're trying to figure out how to get that to us as soon as they can. Did that answer your question, Sheridan?
Yes, thank you very much.
Oh, you're welcome. And we'll try to keep you apprised of the time frame as we become aware of when they can do the parts and pieces.
Yeah, a lot more stuff in the Albion lot today than there was yesterday.
It is, and there's going to be a lot of activity with that, and it'll be nice to get the towers up and get the shift trains going up. And we just hope that they'll find a ring and pinion someplace.
John, did you want to say something? Goldner?
Sorry, no, my video just went out and I was
I see.
getting
Okay.
kicked up. But however, we don't want you to be held up too long, Alan. But the first week of November would be okay because then we can get in and finish that Grizzly water line.
Ah, yes, yes. I was advised that until you've completed the work at the top of the lift, that the road will be passable to wheeled vehicle for a while, which actually will be an ancillary benefit for the town. Okay, any other questions of Alan? In which case, thank you, Alan, for the update.
You're welcome.
And we'll move to the consent agenda.
Good luck to you.
Thank you. You too. You need it as
Thanks.
much as we do.
Yes, we do.
Okay, so the meeting minutes, treasurer.
Mayor, you're muted.
Would anyone like to move that we approve the consent agenda?
So moved.
Second.
Okay, moved and seconded. Any discussion? right, no discussion. In that case, all in favor of approving the consent agenda, say aye or raise your hand.
Aye.
Aye.
Carolyn. Did you vote, Carolyn?
No, I did not, sir. I had an emergency that I needed
Oh.
to attend to. I sincerely apologize.
No problem. The question on the table is, do we approve of the consent agenda?
Yes, I do.
Okay, and Elise, I didn't see a vote from you.
Oh, yeah, I said aye. Sorry.
Did you? Okay, good. All right. The consent agenda is adopted.
Can I ask one?
Sure.
Can I ask one question about the budget? There are a few little changes in the budget. I don't have a bunch of questions. The one though, I don't see where we've recorded any income from the parking pass program for last year and also for this year. Would you like to comment on that, Jen?
I can look at, I believe we did have income coming in. I remember receiving it this spring. It kind of came in one lump sum. So let me look at that and get back to you. And we would not have received any income yet for this year. So that's to be expected for this year. But we did get income.
Yeah, I guess I asked the question because we did budget some revenue for it. And I don't see where we've entered last year. So I just makes me wonder.
We
Does it
did
make
get it.
sense to
Let
keep
me just
budgeting
double
it?
check and find which line item and I'll send that out to everybody.
Cool. Thank you.
Okay.
Yep.
And the passes haven't gone on sale this year, so clearly don't have anything yet, but we certainly did have it last year. Okay, any other questions regarding the department reports? In that case, we'll launch into the mayor's report. As I mentioned, when we were talking to Eleanor, that the summer road is closed for the season. And I think we're all aware of the curtailing or significant reduction of the UTA bus service, and we're trying to work through that, get at least partial service for one of the lines instead of cutting them off altogether. I frankly don't know how we can influence that more than just any of us complaining to UTA. I mean, as was mentioned maybe by Josh, that that there have been bus service reductions from Ogden to Provo, and it's a result of them not being able to hire drivers. And Craig did a little analysis on if you pay drivers more, you ought to be able to hire them, but somehow or another, it's not happening. Chris and I met with the new fire chief, Don Brochette, and we were joined by Mike Mon and Dave Fields last month. Most of the discussion was on wildflowers, not wildfires, not wildflowers. And Chris, do you want to add anything into that? Or actually, yeah, I guess you're on the agenda for talking about capital projects, but not the. I thought we had you on there to talking about the fire business. Apparently not.
No, I'm going to talk about renewable energy and capital projects, but yes, I did join the mayor and the Scuria Jams to talk to the new fire chief, and I think that was kind of a routine get to know you visit. And we did talk a lot about wildfire, and there's another round of perhaps introductory meetings between the fire chief and UFA and UFSA communities coming up about standards of cover, which I think is just a kind of a review of, what UFA services, what, UFA service provides. So.
Next time on my list is the CEIS, for which we've had plenty of discussion already. I just want to encourage everybody again to put in their comments by the end of the day on Monday. The town will put in a comment that's consistent with our established position on the last round. We are hopefully in completing a water line connection to the Grizzly tank. As John Golder mentioned, their delay is actually to our advantage in the sense that that will still be accessible for longer than we had thought, and we might be able to get that connection made. It was a long process to try to get this water line agreement with Mr. Ron's statement. Oh, I wanted to say something about avalanche guns. The howitzers are being retired from the top of the P Ridge here, just over a year. Lots of places have retired artillery pieces as kind of well, they're sometimes in parks. They're historical items. John and I are making application to the Army to see if we could get these retired, or one of these retired pieces, as a historical artifact. The history of avalanche control is largely based in this canyon, and it was started with artillery that World War II veterans found that when they shot rounds into the mountains of Italy, it brought down avalanches. And it was not for protection at that point, it was for other purposes. But that led to using a 75 millimeter howitzer and the development of avalanche control technology here, and then later recoilless rifle, and now the 105 howitzer. So if we could have those available and, or, sequestered maybe for eventual display, I think would be, something that's between the mining era and now as some historical artifacts. So we're working on that. I went to the Utah League of Cities and Towns Convention last week at the Salt Palace. It's a lot of interesting information, and it's an opportunity to meet people in other governments and see what their concerns are. I must say that almost all of the sessions have concerns about growth, and that growth is a really big issue in this state for all communities. And we just heard it here earlier. And I would encourage, and I'll remind you later, that any official or staff, elected official or staff, is eligible to go to these conferences, and they're really informative. John was there, Jen was there for a bit of it. We'll encourage you to go the next time it comes around. At the invitation of the school teacher, whose name is Jayanne, who was the first school teacher here when the schoolroom opened 20 years ago almost. I visited the school kids on September 19th and asked them what they wanted. Well, they want more bump runs and a terrain park. Yeah, it's like, stop all this grooming. clearly a different generation. But something that was a little closer to our ability. They want to swing in the park. And we'll see if we can do something about that. I mean, we had a swing there for some time and it went away for some reasons having to do with safety and so forth, but we'll this is something we might actually be able to do. On Wednesday, the 21st, I met with the Salt Lake Tribune editorial board along with some other mayors and Laura actually, and it results as an editorial in the Salt Lake Trib, which I'd be happy to share with you. Pat Shea has been spearheading this and he's working for a similar meeting with the Deseret News. Chris and I will be working with the Forest Service on a comprehensive regional trail plan, and we have a meeting coming up in just a couple of days to talk to that person in the Forest Service is working on this trail plan. And we'll meet again on November 9th at 4 o'clock. Any questions?
Can you, Roger, can you give me a little bit more about the purpose of your meeting on the trail plan? And just, I really appreciated Sheridan's comments to the Forest Service about why haven't they actually done a usage study instead of just delegating it to the business interests that are not necessarily sensitive to that as I would hope the Forest Service would be. Are you talking about anything that has to do with sustainability and the capacity and things like that?
And the answer, Craig, is I don't know. We were invited to this meeting, and for which the only topic, all we know is the subject, and which has to do with a regional trail plan. And maybe Chris knows more about it than I do, but it was kind of a surprise to me.
Yeah, that meeting is just going to be an interview of you, and they're going to ask questions about your perspective on, today's trails and what tomorrow's trails ought to provide. It's really just the Salt Lake Ranger District is doing a trails master plan. They just begun it basically. And I don't believe it's an update of an existing plan, but rather a new planning framework in response to, input over the last decade or more that we need a regional trails plan. And I don't think anybody knows where it will go, but I would imagine it will, whether it will be amount to a capacity study or not, that questions about sustainable visitation will be addressed. Topics like e-bike use, like we've been talking about in the past couple of meetings, will come up and be addressed. But I don't know what the scope of the scope of the project is, other than that they're conducting interviews, and they have asked us to present to the town council at a future meeting, and I think we have them on an agenda tentatively in the next couple of months.
Yeah, I am frustrated, Greg, kind of getting into the origin of your question, that no one seems to really seriously address what the capacity of this environment is to absorb people. It's just like, it seems like the sense is, well, we'll just keep adding people, and then someday we'll find out we have too many. And that really troubles me. And Sheridan, you asked a very good question last time, which was, why can't we ride e-bikes on the roads that you can drive trucks on? And I don't know the answer to that, but potentially we might be able to get something out of this trails question.
May I invite myself along to that meeting there?
Sure.
Thank
So
you.
Well,
No?
I mean, it was kind of a one-on-one and the mayor asked me.
Oh, okay.
I mean, we can certainly put you in touch with them. If you'd like to be interviewed.
We can talk about this back channel. Thank you.
Sure.
No worries.
Yeah, okay. And I've even forgotten what it is. But let me commit to letting you know as soon as it closes, what happened. All right. Next on the agenda is the treasurer's report. Craig.
There, can you hear me?
Yes.
So I sent a report around to everybody to read ahead of time. I just want to talk for maybe a couple of minutes, just to introduce it, and then mostly just answer questions that I think. So what I mean, I think the major change that we've got really is trying to focus the budgeting process on different areas of responsibility and spread it out over calendar time. So we've got sort of specific topics to talk at different points of the year. And, the objective here is to make the sequencing clear, make sure that everything has its time. I appreciate the fact that, Sheridan was raising, some project ideas in this meeting. And I think it's a good idea just to have a formal calendar around that. So if any of the council members actually have ideas on projects, that there is a point in time that they raise that. Another thing is to make the accountability clear. What we're doing is we're spreading it into the 3 areas of staff payroll, external vendor contracts, and then the project portfolio. So the person that's responsible for the staff salaries is Roger. And under the current proposal, he would be presenting salaries for the staff in December, hopefully with a benchmarking study that helps gives us the data to actually make an informed decision in that area. Then we've got our external contracts, and we've got a number of external contracts that some of which are quite large. John Gildner asked the question of whether this would include the fire service, and I think that's actually a really good point. We should, take a look at that maybe once a year. So that's going to be led by Jen. And then the last part is the projects, which are basically the responsibility of Chris and John. So to go into just a little bit of detail that might be a tad confusing, the way that I define projects was a little bit different than just CapEx projects. Historically, that's the way we've defined projects. In this budgeting process, it's meant to be things that are not the normal course of business. So that would include all CapEx things, but it would also involve, significant expenditures that sort of are created by exogenous factors. Any litigation around the Schrantz estate, or, or the parking situation where we had to spend a bunch of money on the parking thing, which we knew about. And all I'm suggesting is now what we try to do is to organize as a project, and that way we can formally track it as a project. The time sequencing that I'm proposing is that we do a major review of the projects. So in October, so that's a report on all the projects, basically after the summer building season is done. So how far did we get? Are anything's, incomplete? What implications might that have for the next season? And then in February or in December, we would be doing the salaries as well as the normal auditor review in December. In February, we would do the first round of the projects, which is mainly aimed at updating people on where we are on existing projects, but also any new ideas that people have for particular projects that they might want the staff to do some cost work on before we actually make the final contract discussion in April. As always, the final review is not going to be done until the final approval isn't due until June. But hopefully with this kind of calendar, we will be largely done in April. And, you know, I think, you know, Jen asked the question of, okay, what does it mean for the town of Alta council members? And the answer is, well, I don't know exactly, but hopefully here's what it means. It means that we end up having an a priori understanding of what gets discussed when, all right? So that we've got an idea of when the schedule is and when it would be appropriate for any of you to raise certain issues. Second thing is, I really expect out of this kind of process, we get a better understanding of very simple questions like, well, how much did we increase the staff budget this year? How much did our vendor contracts increase due to inflation? Or any individual contracts, you know, did they have a really significant increase? And then I expect over time, we'll get much shorter, simpler financial reports that track the essential elements. And that should lead actually to better projections, not just of our budget, but also of our completion rates on projects and things like that. So that's the reason I sent the stuff out ahead of time was I had hoped and expect that you guys would read it. If there are any questions, I'm happy to answer those as best I can.
Questions? John, Carolyn, Elise, Sheridan.
I don't really have a
Stanford.
question. I just appreciate so much, Craig, you putting this document together, and I admire the goals that you're seeking and want to back that for you and the staff and everyone on the budget committee.
For my part, I'm already thinking ahead at what projects we want to complete next summer. And no, I don't know if we're going to get them done, but I'd sure like to go in there with a flying start. And as John Goldner well knows, there are lots of impediments to slow you down on those flying starts.
Yeah, look, no budget process is going to be magical, but I do hope that what we're doing is shifting to a little bit longer term planning stuff so that the idea is like you're saying, okay, I really hope we can get these projects done, you know, next summer. Have a process behind that, which allows us to raise them and track them. And my general experience is if you track your projects, you get better at the execution of them, and consequently you get better at predicting what you can do next year.
Right. We hope to learn from experience, which, you know, I guess I can't say any more about that. Okay, anything else for Craig? John, you've got.
You're unmuted.
You're muted.
Here, how's that better?
There you go.
I think this is an ambitious program Craig's outlined. I think that if we get 70 or 80% of it done on the timeline, that would be winning. I remember when I got to Alyeska, I made a 10-year plan. It really was a 20-year plan. It just took me 5 years to realize that. I guess I just wanted to put a plug in for Jen's project list. I saw Jen took the time to write a thoughtful email the other day and had 5 or 6 things that she thinks are worthwhile from the project type issues in the finance world. And I hope that we integrate Jen's list into this list.
Agree, John. And just so you know, the mental time frame that I had in this was 3 years, although I'm feeling it's probably more like 5. But
yeah. Right on.
Okay, anything else for Craig? All right, let's go to the noise ordinance. The noise ordinance has generated a lot of noise over the last few months. And I think we have one that's pretty very close to the finish line. Cameron has been working with several of you. And do you want to make any introductory remarks, Cameron?
Well, for the sake of brevity, I think everyone has had their input, and it looks to me like everything's ready to go. And I thank everyone for giving their feedback. And I've always said the answer lies in the debate and the discussion, and hopefully we are there with this ordinance.
Okay. Tell you what, I move that we adopt ordinance 2022-0-5. And if anyone would like to second that, they can, and then we can enter into
Second.
discussion. Second, John, second. So it's open for discussion.
My, I was talking about this with Roger the other day, and I don't know if this is a question for Cameron, but I know listening to the last town council meeting last month, there was kind of a question sometimes on like, if somebody's making noise, who is going to be penalized? So if you have a bunch of wedding guests that are staying at one of the lodges and it is maybe 2 a.m. and the wedding has ended, but the guests have gone outside and maybe there's 3 of them and they're very loud. I don't know if we're penalizing the business for that or if we're penalizing the guests who are making the noise. And I think Roger and I were talking that we were hoping that that could be up to the discretion of the marshals on how that would go. And so I just wanted to make sure this ordinance was written in a way that maybe that was possible for the marshals to make that decision.
Yeah, and that's a good question. So it really would be dependent on each scenario. So the scenario that you described, if the marshals were there and made contact with the people that were outside of the business that were causing the problem, then the marshal's office could deal with those individuals specifically. If there was something that was originating from a property or a business, then the property owner would ultimately be responsible. And so the marshal's office has the discretion based on the information that they learn and where they need to take action that night. And then separately later on, the town can always follow up if we have a property owner that has repeat problems with, large number of guests that go outside and cause problems, then we can address those issues with the property owner later.
Perfect. Yeah, that's what I was looking for. I mean, I think our marshals have the training and the knowledge and to make those decisions. And I just wanted to make sure we had that option for them. That's the only comment I have. Other than that, I'm ready to pass this thing.
Okay. Carolyn or Sheridan, you want to say anything?
Is there any possibility of considering having just Friday and Saturday nights be till 11 o'clock? And that would enable businesses to still apply to the town if there were other times when they wanted times past 11 o'clock.
Wait a minute. You wanted,
No.
oh,
Just that was wrong.
right.
I'm just thinking about how disruptive the past short period of time has been, and wondering if there's any chance that we could consider just having the noise ordinance go to 11 on Friday and Saturday and 10 the other days of the week. And of course, if there was like a holiday weekend, that hotel could always apply for a later night till 11.
Are you making a motion to make an amendment to the ordinance that's the way it's written and presented? Because
yes,
I guess that's the way you would want to make
Yes.
that change.
Yes, I am making that as I am attempting to have a little bit more peace and quiet on just a few more nights of the week. So yes, Elise, I am trying to make an amendment.
So your amendment, as I understand it, is to lower the curfew to 10 p.m. for Sunday through Thursday, and leave it at 11 for Friday and Saturday. Okay, did I phrase that properly?
Yes.
Okay. Anyone who want to second that amendment? I'll tell you what, I'll second it. And it's open for discussion. John, you look like it's 3 a.m.
Yeah. Well, it just seems like it's never ending, that it's just one more thing and one more thing and one more thing. It's been a pretty dysfunctional process. It's taken us 4 months to get where we are. This is just, here at the 11th hour, we're ready to pass the thing and you're still not happy. It's pretty harsh.
Okay, Sheridan, you want to say anything?
I appreciate what you're bringing up, Carolyn. I think I was ready, set to go, just to pass the ordinance as presented, and still feel that way about the ordinance as presented. I'd like to give this a chance to work or not, and then revisit it if we could. If that's where I'm sitting with this at this point.
Elise?
I think, and just to go back to what John said, I've been on the council for a little while now. I would tell you that 4 months is pretty good for passing an ordinance like this. So we're actually I think we're doing pretty good. But I'm leaning towards, definitely just voting for what's been presented to us, and giving that a try. I think Roger and I had this discussion that, we can always go and change these things if something's not working. It may take us a little bit of time, but I'm probably not, I'm more willing to vote for what's been presented to us than changing it again.
Okay. In that case, let's vote on the amendment. All in favor of the amendment, vote aye. Carolyn, those against?
Nay.
Nay. Okay, so the amendment fails. So let's go back to the non-amended resolution, and I think we're ready to vote on that. All in favor of the noise ordinance 2022-0-5, raise your hand or say aye.
Aye.
Okay. Any against? Okay, Carolyn voted against, but
And just to be clear, I really appreciate all the effort that has gone into attempting to make this noise ordinance. And I appreciate working together to try and make something comfortable, and it is certainly better than it has been. So we'll see how it goes.
Okay, so the ordinance passes as written. My own attitude on this is the following: if this doesn't work, we'll try something else. But let's give this a try. Okay, next one has to do with discussion and possible action on 2022-R-18 fee schedule, and I think that's Jen's issue item.
Yeah, so with the adoption of the noise ordinance, Cameron's informed me that we needed to add a couple things to the existing fee schedule, which have been presented. And I also had a little housekeeping piece that I was hoping that we could kind of clean up when it comes to the sewer fee. It seems that in June, when we updated the fee schedule, we missed that. And so I had a proposal there. Do you want me to specifically go over what those numbers are?
Well, you've actually posted them for everybody. My question, I guess, is, does anybody have any questions on what you've?
Well,
put
I
out there?
think it's important to note that it's $1,000 fine, which is, I'm going to say, disproportionate with the rest of our fee schedule. I think we should all at least be aware that we're voting for $1,000 fine here.
Which I believe is the maximum, Cameron, for a class B. Is that?
Yeah, so the town's fine schedule is limited by whatever the state misdemeanor maximum fine is, which is why the $1,000 came. There were a number of council members and town officials that requested that maximum fine. And the reason was the maximum because we're going to give a written warning and an education on the ordinance before that. And so the thought process was that they've received a warning, and then we want the penalty to be something that's going to motivate people to comply.
Okay. Mike.
I just had a question. Are we talking about the civil penalty fine here or the criminal penalty through our justice court?
Yeah, good distinction. It's the civil penalty.
Thank you.
Assessing.
Yeah, and for the council's knowledge, our justice court judge has discretionary powers up and down the uniform fine schedule that the state provides. So I think $1,000 fine would be a rarity on the criminal side.
Would it be a rarity on the civil side?
That really is, would come down to where the town council wants to set it in the fee schedule. And one thing that I would say, because we're starting to get into an era where we're contemplating imposing civil penalties for our parking ordinance and now our noise ordinance. The town has some work to do on this, in terms of setting up, a process for tracking violations and probably appointing an administrative law official to hear appeals.
Well, that's interesting. Do you want to say anything about that, Cameron or Polly?
Yeah, it's really in order to have a civil enforcement process, you have to give some type of an appeal to comply with due process requirements. And so for any civil violation that was issued, the town would need to have in place an appeal process. Generally, how that's handled with municipalities like Alta are to simply hire an administrative law judge, which is generally just an attorney or a retired judge, on either a time basis or a piece basis. So for example, if we have, an appeal once in a blue moon, then we would just pay the administrative law judge to hear that appeal for whatever that contract rate would be. With the parking that's going to be going on with winter parking, if we had a number of appeals regularly, we could simply just schedule the administrative law judge for a time that worked and have all of them, during that time.
And I would maybe just throw in on the parking that we've contracted out that civil process to Interstate for, present day.
Okay.
Cameron, would it be appropriate in the fee schedule to call that out as being civil as opposed to criminal? Should we be including that language anywhere?
Yeah, the code itself, the noise ordinance itself, it allows the town discretion to either issue a criminal citation or a civil citation. And so that would be the town's discretion to do that. And so if they choose the criminal violation, it'll be set by the fee schedule for the criminal violation. If we issue a civil, it will be here.
Set here.
And one other point.
Go ahead, Mike. I'm sorry.
Yeah, one other point I have seen other municipalities do is, that I've seen graduated schedules, $50 for a first offense, 500 for a second, 1,000 for each day thereafter, that kind of thing.
Yeah, John, what do you want to say?
That discretion, Cameron, is that I noticed that we didn't make the change that Mike was asking for regarding the shall and wills and changing those to may. So how does your comment about would the marshal at the time be making the decision about what type of penalty was going to be, civil or criminal? Or so we're giving him the discretion to decide that, but we're not giving him the discretion Mike was asking for with respect to enforcement of the ordinance?
Maybe I could comment, John, just, that was just a little language cleanup. It really, after talking with Cameron and Polly, we don't see where this limits our discretionary powers in any way, as voted on. So there are a few laws on the books where we do not have that discretion, like the domestic violence laws, but I think in this case we maintain it.
Good to know. Thank you.
And to answer your question, the discretion would come really at the time that they issue the citation. If they issue a criminal citation, then it's going to go through the criminal process. If they issue either a written warning or an actual civil citation, then it would go through that process. And so the marshal's office could decide to do that on their own. And the town could also decide to do it separately. The town's administration, if the marshal's office went to a location and resolved it in whatever fashion that they did, the town could then take additional action if they felt that was necessary. What we can't do is we can't issue a criminal citation and also a civil citation. We just have to pick one of the two.
Great. And do you agree with Mike's characterization of their ability for the deputy to have discretion at the time of the incident?
Yeah, and when I talked to Mike and the rest of the town staff and the mayor, the shall and the may in an ordinance is not binding necessarily on the staff that are enforcing that ordinance. The town always has the discretion to decide to enforce or not, given whatever the circumstances are. And so the marshal's office would always have that ability.
Thanks for clarifying that.
Okay. Any further discussion on this fee schedule change?
I'm concerned. I didn't realize we were kind of stepping into such a morass of potential consequences with regard to civil and criminal consequences and the need to hire new staff around this. Is anyone else feeling? I'm feeling out of my depth with this. I'm feeling like, I didn't know the backstory around some of this and feel anxious about voting on it at this point. Maybe I've missed some clarity that you all have that I don't, but so we're talking about, Mike's raising that we need to hire a administrative judge at this point, that where are we at in this? I had no idea that this was what we were potentially contemplating.
I think if everything goes the way that we think it's supposed to go, right? So if the noise ordinance is really obeyed by everybody, then we really don't have a problem, right? Like theoretically, people are going to be good citizens and obey the noise problem, right? So theoretically, we're not going to have this major problem. One thing that we all did spend some time discussing was that with the noise ordinance would come some teeth to make sure that there was an encouragement to be in line with the noise ordinance. So this is kind of what I was a little bit afraid of, is that we would, come to some kind of agreement on the noise ordinance, but then not be able to agree on the punishment phase. or the teeth phase. And you can always take the teeth out, right? Like we can vote to have the noise ordinance and we can change it. So we can vote to have the teeth and then change it.
Mike,
So,
Tom wants to
form
say
of-
something.
Oh, sorry, Mayor.
Yeah,
So,
go ahead, Mike.
Sheridan, if I can maybe help alleviate some of your concerns, present day, our office would not be considering issuing civil violation notices, knowing that we don't have the pieces in place for it. It's a great tool for the future, and it needs some work. But I think that what you all just voted on gives us every tool that we need to address the issue and bring about compliance in a variety of different ways.
Okay.
And when it comes to hiring somebody, I think we're talking about hours, not days, right?
Yeah, that's correct.
Yeah, okay. So I don't see the a serious budgetary impact of hiring a judge.
Yeah. Yeah, and my point, and Cameron, I think reinforced it, is that if we do as a town start doing civil violation notices, we owe it to the public to have a good system in place that protects their rights, including appeals.
Agreed.
Okay, I'd like to call the question on action for the 2022 R18 fee schedule. If there's, let's see, do I have to?
We don't have a motion yet, or I haven't heard a first and a second.
I move we adopt it. How's that?
I'll second.
All right.
Do you want to make an amendment for the housekeeping deal with the sewer to add that to what was presented? So changing the fee schedule, which says $375 per ECU value to $627.52.
Yeah, which was just basically an error in the last round, wasn't it?
Yeah.
Okay. So I guess, all right, it's been moved and second to adopt this fee schedule, and I would like to make an amendment. We adopt that we incorporated in the fee schedule the changes in the sewer rates that Jen just described.
Which were the sewer rates that we planned on when we did the budget back in January. Was this
Right.
Actually, those were Harris's sewer rates. Really, we inherited those rates. And so there's nothing new in those rates.
No,
Just
it's
trying to
it's
acknowledge-
basically having the fee schedule match what you guys approved when you approved the sewer rates with resolution 22 R15 in June.
Okay. So I made an amendment.
It's also the,
Go ahead, John.
I'm sorry, go ahead, Roger. No, I was just gonna say, it's also the rate I used to build the sewer 10-year plan back in January, just
okay,
if anybody cares.
All right, so I move that we amend this resolution to include those revised sewer rates. Anybody want to second that?
I'll second.
Sheridan. All right, let's call for the question. Everybody in favor of the amendment, say aye. Aye.
Aye.
No opposed. All right, so then let's have the vote on adopting the fee schedule. All in favor of that?
Aye.
Aye. Anybody opposed?
Aye.
Okay. John, you're adopting it. Oh yeah, you're voting in favor of it?
I'm opposed because I think $1,000 is a ridiculous fine.
Oh, okay. So that, all right, with that note, we've adopted the fee schedule. All right, we'll go on to the community energy program update. While we're half an hour over schedule already, it turns out that we need to take some immediate action on that. Isn't that right, Chris?
Hi, I was muted. Council does not have to take action, doesn't have to pass a motion or adopt a resolution or anything like that. So basically, the town is, we continue to participate in the Community Renewable Energy Program, whereby participating communities seek to develop, resources to obtain 100% of our electricity from renewable sources by 2030. The agency board is hard at work on a program application to the Utah Public Service Commission, which per the legislation that created the program has to be submitted by the end of December. And in that program application will be a couple of documents that are germane to the town. And which are described in the briefing memo that I included in the council packet for your review in this meeting. Those two things are a model ordinance that every community participating in the Community Renewable Energy Program will be required to adopt in order to finalize our participation, and then a low-income assistance plan. So I'll just say a couple of things about those two items, and then open it up for questions and comments. And I'll start with the low-income assistance plan. It's a little bit more straightforward, and I'll describe why. Basically, the agency is responding again to that enabling legislation that requires participating communities to plan to mitigate impacts to income-limited ratepayers in the event that electricity bills increase as a result of moving people over to this renewable energy electricity asset portfolio. There's a committee of board members who are working primarily on developing strategies to assist low-income customers, which are described in that memo we provided. I don't believe the town is going to have to take action on a low-income plan. I think that's basically what's going to happen. What's going to happen is that a template is being developed. Every community will sort of have their own copy of that template, and then a list of organizations that work to engage low-income ratepayers will be included in that plan. And then the board of the agency will vote on which of those low-income assistance strategies that are included in that briefing memo will be provided at the programmatic level. So they would apply to all customers, in every participating community, essentially. One reason why I describe the low-income plan requirement as straightforward is that we don't have, according to the data that the program is working, which comes from the census, the Utah Office of Consumer Services, and the Public Service Commission, we do not have, by definition, income limited ratepayers or low-income ratepayers in the town of Alta. But every other community participating in the program, including Salt Lake City, Ogden, various small and medium-sized communities around the state, do have low-income ratepayers. So that's the low-income plan. The next and more consequential item that we will have to take action on eventually is this matter of the model ordinance. And the ordinance is going to finalize communities' participation in the program. And after the ordinance is adopted, all ratepayers and participating communities will be automatically opted into the program. The reason we're providing you the text now is that the draft, the language of that ordinance has to be included in this program application to the Public Service Commission. So our opportunity basically to weigh in on that ordinance is now, and actually the agency has asked for that input by Friday. Staff and the mayor and legal counsel have reviewed that ordinance. We don't find any problems with it. But I would just recommend at this point the council consider that the primary effect of passing the ordinance is that customers will be opted into this program. They will be given 2 notices of their ability to opt out. But basically that'll be the effect of the ordinance, and there is a possibility that rates could go up on this new portfolio of energy resources. So the purpose of this presentation was that we were asked by the agency to provide that model ordinance language to you for any feedback that you have, so that feedback can be taken into account prior to submitting that application to the Public Service Commission. And that's what I have for you today. So any questions are welcome.
I read it and it seemed in order to me. I didn't study it, but it seemed acceptable.
That's my impression too, John. The downside consequences are between 0 and none. So,
Because every individual could make their own decision whether to opt out.
right. So it's, yeah. Okay, so no action is requested and no action is needed, right?
That's correct. Yeah. You're always welcome to reach out. So the mayor is our primary board member. I've been serving as our alternate board member. And I'm helping facilitate one of the board committees. And I guess I would preview that there will be, future action required. And I think there'll be more frequent updates on this as we get into the meat of program development. So.
Yeah, and I might say that Chris is really on top of this issue, has been for some time. Well before I arrived. Chris, the next item is the capital projects report, but you've included a pretty good write-up on that in the consent agenda. And I just wonder if there's any further discussion or question that needs to go with it. Yeah, Jen?
Well, I didn't mean to jump in front of Chris. I just was going to address the transfer when you're ready.
Yeah, I don't really have anything more to add beyond what I put in the report. We've made progress in the last month to get one project done. A couple other projects are more or less scheduled to be done in the next few weeks. I guess we'll see what else can be done, before we're in a deep winter snowpack condition. But I appreciate Craig's presentation and our general move towards being more sort of strategically prepared to, take action to do projects while the iron's hot, strike while the iron's hot. And I think we'll be going into the next construction season with better preparation to do projects, get projects done while we can because of that.
Jen, you want to add to that?
Yeah, so back when the council adopted the final budget we're talking about fiscal year 22, you had approved a transfer from the general fund to the CapEx project for roughly $405,000 up to. And I had reported at that time that I would come back to the council once I had worked with Steve Rowley, our accountant, to come back and, poll the council and make sure that we were transferring the right amount. And so I did provide a write-up background on the kind of 100% rule in the clerk's report, as well as a recommendation just to get the conversation started. And I'm happy to dive deeper into that if anybody didn't read it or needs me to remind them. But I did make a recommendation that we transfer $100,000 from the general fund to the Capital X program. Steve calculated the number that would be a minimum to be about $54,000. And from his standpoint, he recommended at least 75 get transferred. But for a number of reasons that I outlined, I felt like 100,000 was a nice number to put into the capital projects plan. We have a number of projects in that plan that need funding. It's a good showing, I think, of the council as far as being dedicated, yet it doesn't restrict too many of our funds. So that's a summary.
Okay, and is it necessary or appropriate that we vote on making that transfer at this point?
It is a decision, yes, that it helps with the audit and the preparation of the work that's done. You've authorized me to transfer up to the 405, so I kind of can do that without a vote, but because I'm suggesting to transfer less, I want buy-in from the council. I know Craig and I have talked about it, and a few of you have responded, but
Well, let's see if we have any
What-
comment
what-
from, go ahead, John.
What does Craig think about it?
You're muted, Craig.
No longer. Jen and I've talked about it. I think the suggestion makes great sense and we should do it. And I think, Jen, I think you don't need a resolution. I think you just need to note it in the minutes, right? Yep.
Yeah.
Okay. Anybody else? Carolyn, Sheridan, Elise? Okay.
Support it.
So we're not adopting the revised budget. We're just noting this in the minutes. So I
yes.
noticed there were a few
And-
other little changes you had made. Sorry.
I might have missed your question. You're just.
We're not,
Greg and Polly,
we're
let
not
me know.
adopting the, I'm sorry, go ahead.
That's okay. I think you're consenting, I guess, to me transferring $100,000 as opposed to 405. And if I don't believe it needs to be more formal than that, but Polly, if it should, please let me know.
No, I think it's okay. You're not changing this is the amount that was part of the budget already. It's just more detail. So I don't think you need a more formal vote.
Okay. I had said that I would come to the council, and so this is what I'm doing, is coming to the council and making sure that we're all in agreement on that transfer.
So the other little notes that were on the side, are we also approving those too, or those will wait till we sort of have a bigger approval of a revised budget?
Which notes on the side?
Weren't there some other comments about things that had changed slightly, like margin notes?
Oh, there are some margin notes. I'm still working through that, but no, this is not addressing any of those.
John,
Cool.
I think the time to do that is when we do the annual review with the auditor. That will be the final approval, and everything will be done by then.
Okay.
Okay.
Thank
So
you very much.
this is something for which we don't need even a vote. We're just going to do it, right?
I am just gonna do it as long as yes,
Without objection.
right. Thank you.
Okay. Next item is new business. Anybody have any new business at 7 minutes to 7?
Just
I had one quick thing. Oh, go ahead, Craig.
Just Roger, the item that we discussed, which is, I think it would be really wise if we could get a salary benchmarking study done.
Yes.
I think John's done some work on that, but you're going to need some budget to pay the consultant guy to do it.
I think we have enough money to do that. You're the treasurer. I don't think we
Yeah.
need to. I think this is going to be below our threshold to have to require, I don't know, competitive bids or something like that.
Yeah, I think you're right. It shouldn't be a huge amount of money.
To kind of expand on what Craig said, I am concerned that we don't have a really good handle on our staff salaries and benefits relative to other people in comparable positions and comparable circumstances. And I'd like to make sure that we do, and we need somebody outside of our immediate community to give us some hard data on that. So that's what we're talking about doing here. Anything else in the way of new business?
I just had
Yes.
one quick comment. I noticed that we're going to move the meeting to 2:00 with work sessions at 1:00 starting in December. And I thought I would just point out that if that's not what we want to do, we should probably address it at the November meeting.
Good point. Good point.
Thanks.
Depends on the snow.
Yeah, it depends on.
Murphy's Law, right? It's Murphy's Law.
Did you want to say something, Jen?
I did. I wanted to respond to John Burns' question earlier in the meeting about the parking revenue. So if you look on page for fiscal year 22, John, it's line item 1032-220. It's on page 38 of the consent agenda. We brought in 14,500. And then also for fiscal year 23, we've budgeted 12,500, so a little more conservative. And that number is shown on page 24, same GL code.
Ben or Mike, can you remind me what percentage is of that? What percentage is that of the total charges that are taken in? I know that was part of the proposal of going with this, but I can't recall. Do you remember?
It's an even split with interstate.
Okay.
There's a little variant to it that deals with the early morning parking reservations where we would have a even split of that as well. Last year, there was no revenue from that because the tech costs far exceeded what was brought in.
Thank you.
Yeah, we incurred considerable run-in costs that we will not do again. John, I think you were speaking with muted.
Will we be following the ski area and going to 3 days a week on the parking?
Yes, yeah. There's no sense to try. If we're not in sync with them,
Right.
we'll have a hell of a mess. So,
Well, our permit requirement is actually 7 days a week, and it was last year as well for the north side, which is really the part that the town regulates.
So there isn't really day fee in this 14,500. It's just it's permit sales.
Yeah, it's all real static, with the exception of that really small early morning reservation system for hikers.
At least we're getting something. So
Yeah.
that's good.
yeah. Okay. Any other new business? Would someone like to move for adjournment?
I'll move for it.
All right,
Second.
All in favor? Aye.
Aye.
Hi.
Thanks for sticking with us, folks. I appreciate your tenacity. All right, and we got the noise ordinance over and done with. Yay.
Yay! Good job.
All right.
Very much.
Hey, keep it down, will you?
Yeah.